All right. Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Longacre. We're looking at Notes C today in your USA and Canada notes packet. So that's Notes C. If you didn't get a chance to finish Notes D, you can always find the notes on our Google Drive, and I encourage you to do that. But today we're really looking at some economic characteristics. And so when we talk about economics, we're talking about the way that countries make money, the types of jobs that people do, the levels of economic activities, primary, tertiary, quaternary, so on and so forth. And so we start today with some of the major exports from either side. Again, remember, exports are things that a country sells to make a profit. Another way to think about that is that exports are essentially what a country deems it has a comparative advantage in. Remember, because we don't sell everything we have, we sell things that we can produce at a cheaper cost. So for the United States, that's technological equipment, that's aircraft, and vehicles. We have a very strong industry and manufacturing center in our country, and so we're going to focus on those things. And then for Canada, it's oil, vehicles, and technological equipment. So you're going to start seeing a lot of similarities between the United States and Canada today. But the big difference there is oil. Canada chooses to produce its oil. The United States has chosen to take a little bit of a different approach with its oil and not produce quite as much and sell that. And so that is how those are the primary ways that each side is making money. Second piece here is that both the United States and Canada have highly developed infrastructure. Now, you do not need to write anything down on the right side of your notes in terms of examples, but what I would like you to write down is what exactly infrastructure is. Okay, infrastructure are big facilities and systems that serve a public good. Examples of that would be bridges, subways, power plants, and so on the left-hand side of your notes, under where it says infrastructure, I encourage you to write down that definition. Infrastructure, in a lot of ways, folks, are things that you don't appreciate sometimes, but without them, life would be very miserable. For example, a power plant is an example of infrastructure. What would life be like if we didn't have electricity to power our homes? Trains and subways, public transportation. How would we get around in a city if most of our city was trying to drive cars and not moving on a subway? A bridge, how would we cross over that river if we hadn't built a bridge? Even roads and things, how would we get around if our federal government and cities didn't build these roads for us? So infrastructure is crucial to the development of countries, and the United States and Canada have a lot of both. Third, both have diversified economies. So what you want to do in your notes is just take note, write down some examples of that. Look at how many people in the United States are doing primary jobs. Okay, 1%. That really shows it to you. It's a very small percentage. 19% are doing secondary, and just as good a reminder, remember primary jobs are jobs where people are taking resources out of the ground, where secondary jobs are then where people are taking those resources and turning them into finished products. So manufacturing, steel mill, a car plant. But then 80% of Americans are doing service-related jobs, tertiary level jobs. That's pretty amazing. Teachers, policemen, firemen, all doing service jobs. So you might think those are really, really high and extraordinary, but look at Canada. Canada's very close. Canada has 2% primary jobs, probably most to do with oil production. They are 27% in the secondary sector, and then 71% of their population are doing services. So still some pretty amazing facts and figures there, but overall very diversified, meaning different types of economies. Both the United States and Canada have a 99% literacy rate. It's hard to really have a 100% literacy rate because you can never account for every single person in your country, but 99% is about as high as we can go. Both countries have very high standards of living. Now, we typically measure standard of living in terms of how much money there is per person. Now, the geographical or term for that would be GDP per capita. Okay, GDP stands for gross domestic product, and then per capita is per person. So how much money do you make per person? Go ahead and take a guess on what you think the United States GDP per capita is. Just think of a number in your mind, and then I'll give it to you here. It is 56,100. That's a pretty high number in terms of world average. Now, it does not mean that every American makes $56,000, but what it means is that if you take all the Americans' income, divide it by how many people there are, that's your number. And then look how close Canada is. Not too far behind, still very high, still very wealthy country at 45,600. Both countries are highly urbanized. Now, you're looking at Toronto here, and that's the CN Tower. And both countries are at 82% in terms of how many people live in the cities. Okay, that's what it means to live in an urban setting, to live in a city. So 82% of Americans live inside of a city limit. Both countries are also highly mobile. We've talked a little bit about the influence of cars and how the automobile has really shaped our landscape with things like gas stations and motels. So for the United States, we have 0.797 cars per person in our country. So almost one per person. In Canada, it's 0.662. Now, it's hard to compare that essentially, but if you look at what the world average is, about 0.19, you can see that we have almost 5 times as many cars, if not more, in our country. So we're very, very mobile. A lot of people are owning cars. In terms of natural resources, the United States and Canada are going to have some similarities here. We have a lot of forests, oil, and farmland. And look at what Canada has: oil, forests, and minerals. Now, for Canada, a lot of that oil and minerals is going to come from that northern section around the Hudson Bay called the Canadian Shield. They do have lots of minerals up there, some of which are easy to get at, some of which are not. But both of us have forests, and we're both going to have a little bit of farmland there. So lots of natural resources are going to lead to a lot of wealth. All right, and then some of the final key things that are a little different here is that both the United States and Canada are also involved in an economic union called NAFTA. I hope that's ringing some bells for you. We've talked about NAFTA before in our economic unit. NAFTA stands for the North American Free Trade Agreement. And there are only 3 countries as a part of NAFTA, okay? In the south, you have Mexico. In the middle, you have the United States. And in the north, we have Canada. So altogether, that is North America, which is why it's called the North American Free Trade Agreement. Now, what North American Free Trade Agreement basically is promoting trade amongst those 3 countries by reducing taxes. So for the United States, I had people in my class guess, what do you think it really is that we're after from Canada and that we want cheaper? So we, reduce taxes, and if you're getting it, the answer would be oil. We import a lot of oil from Canada, and we do it tax-free so that we can get that for cheaper. Now, the downside of NAFTA is that if there are no taxes coming from goods from out of the country, there's also a big loss of jobs. And a lot of American companies are putting their factories in Mexico where they don't pay people quite as much and then producing the same product. So NAFTA has kind of come under a lot of scrutiny. It might be gone in the next couple of years depending on what our administration does, but both a good and bad. What you want to get out of that is that it's these 3 countries of North America, okay? Mexico, U.S., and Canada. All right, next piece. Both the United States and Mexico, United States and Canada also have a lot of multinational corporations. So in the box on your notes, this is what you're going to write on the left-hand side. Oh, bell just went off at school. The multinational corporations you can see around the world are huge corporations that start in either America or Canada and have had really big impacts on world culture. So you can see some of those examples: Walmart, Starbucks, McDonald's, gas stations like Mobil, and car companies like Ford. Lots and lots of examples there. Huge corporations coming out of our countries. Second are world financial markets. What you're looking at in the picture is the New York Stock Exchange. This is really like the headquarters for a lot of the world's money, and definitely a huge financial source of wealth for both countries. Third is sustained economic growth. Both the United States and Canada have proven over a period of time that they are constantly improving in terms of their wealth and their overall status. So Definitely very, very wealthy countries. And then fourth, and unfortunately, part of the problem here also is that there's also a very large widening income gap that's coming out of this, and the rich are unfortunately getting richer as the poor are not necessarily getting much wealthier either. So wrapping up here, the final piece in the U.S.-Canada section is that there's also a lot of U.S.-Canada culture that gets exported around the world, and it's a little strange to think of culture as an export, but we influence other countries and other cultures, whether we believe it, whether we realize it or not. And so when you're looking at this picture here, you're seeing a McDonald's, which is an American company, but it's written here in Russian, or this Coke ad is written in Spanish, and so we have a huge impact on the economy of other nations. We have a huge impact on their culture, and Canada does as well. Like here's a nice picture of Drake, kind of from that funny video that he has. Drake is Canadian. These bands, Rush, Pearl Jam, maybe you've heard of them, maybe you haven't. They were huge hits back in the 80s and 90s. Those were Canadian bands. And then, simple things like American jeans. We have pushed those types of cultural symbols out to the rest of the world, and they've really changed quite a bit. So sometimes this is good, sometimes it's not. There has been some backlash against United States culture. There's been a demise of traditional values. Some people don't like the American culture that's getting pushed onto them. Others don't like it because local businesses can't compete. And so not everybody, wants these huge corporations in their communities and in their areas, but that is kind of a side effect of being one of the more powerful nations in the entire world. So that is Note C. Hopefully that makes sense. What you want to do now in Schoology is open up your study guide and start working on your study guide for the rest of class. You will have a test next period, so please make sure you're doing that. And that is all. Please ask your teacher for any questions. You can always email me for any questions. And I will see you next week. All right, take care.